Welcome to the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I am so thrilled to be here today with Tricia Eastman, who was such an integral part of my path here. So Trish, thank you so much for coming here today and sharing your wisdom, your beauty, all of it with us.
I'm so honored to be here and just really grateful for what you're representing in the world in terms of coming forward yourself. It takes a lot of bravery to be a psychedelic mom, to take the time for yourself because, just motherhood in itself is such an act of service. And then on top of that, to put yourself out there in a public way. And I remember, I started this work almost 9 years ago. And I remember when I first put myself out there, how vulnerable it felt. And, also just, the legality stuff that's happening. And, it's just like a crazy world that we're living in right now. So I just want to also bow to you. And, you've had some really beautiful guests on your show that have really brought topics into light in the psychedelic space that I think are really important to be talking about. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, honestly, you were my biggest inspiration in this space. So to have you here is such an honor. You and Joseph. Joseph is not here today, but sending him my deep love and appreciation for all he has, given me and I've received from him in my life as well, both of you. So I'm going to do an intro for you, but it is hard. These words don't really amplify the human being that you are, but Trish, you are initiated medicine woman and the founder of a nonprofit organization, Ancestral Heart. And at your core, you are really bridging preservation and reciprocity of ancestral wisdom, traditions, and bioculture, cultural heritage, which is so important in this space. And you're drawing on your own ancestral line and decades of being an initiate of the Bwiti. And I know your deep passion for this medicine, iboga, and the gift that you have brought to the world in sharing it and going through such a difficult initiation to share this medicine. And you shared it with me, and I'll be forever eternally grateful for that. You gave retreats worldwide, and you have served people from special forces to political dignitaries, to celebrities, to psychedelic moms. You are the first medicine woman who ever served me medicine. And as I said, were just such an instrumental part on my path. And you are currently about to publish, it's in the process, a book called Seeding Consciousness that I am so excited to get my hands on. And you are launching a retreat in the Azores called who?
Hugh,
H-U.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to dive into all of this with you and all that you're bringing into the world. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And I just want to say, when you were saying that, I wanted to tear up in my eyes. It's been such a long journey, and on one side of the coin, I am deeply humbled by my ancestral history, which is being born into two lineages that just had like the most horrific trauma, murder, rape, being immigrants, widowed, single mothers, like my great 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 grandmother Jesus, who came across the border in Texas. Which is like a hot debate right now. That's why right? I'm in this country. She came across as a widow, and
wow.
And I just feel, because there was so much separation in my family, a lot of family members, like my father, were adopted by different parts of the family because of all the trauma. Like certain of our family lineage was not even able to like raise their own children. And so I came in with just like the most harrowing trauma. And then my mother, who is this just beautiful saint who, grew up with her ancestral roots, on her father's side from Mexico, really in the strong lineage of prayer. And I think of like the curanderas from Mexico, even the Mazatec healers, which my family is from Oaxaca. My Ortega side of the family is from Oaxaca. And they always use prayer with medicine. And I think that is what that broke the chains of all the ancestral curses. And it allowed me to get out from under that patterning and find a new way. And at the same time, still in finding my way, I still, had to face a lot of things. And I'm just like, what the hell is this? And a lot of it I learned, was from my ancestral roots, which I still to this day feel shame in my body from. And I still get pains. And it's interesting how, like, for me, at least, I looked at during this last eclipse, I was with my mother, my sister, Jen, who's pregnant, who I'm so excited for. I'm praying that mine will come next. I'm 43, so knock on wood, I think it'll be good. But she's having her first child. She came, she's like 6 months along, and my sister, Teresa, and like everyone in the family has like, IBS. And during this eclipse, it was like all about ancestral stuff. And I was so like, I feel like I can be honest with you, but I was definitely constipated. And I'm normally not like that. I meditate in the morning. I do Chadao, which is a tea ceremony based
ceremony. I'm drinking pu'er right now.
Oh yeah. I mean, the pu'er makes me poo, to be honest. And I literally spent my whole life growing up where I would go to the bathroom late at night and my mom would be in there on the toilet for hours. And I was like, I'm never going to be like this. And I think a lot of my stuff with eating disorders was around just like, get that stuff out of your body, because, taking a lot of laxatives and stimulants and even tobacco, things like even as a teenager to just like push stuff out of my system because of that ancestral blockage. And so I did a lot of work around that. And it was so interesting, like just the pain of the ancestors and the shame just like hanging out in there. And still after like, I feel like I'm in a pretty good space, but still, lots of work to do.
It goes. Well, how interesting. Just looking at your history, the ancestral lines that you come from, the trauma there coming into the United States. And then who would know that you then would end up being a carrier of this medicine that is really at the root of healing ancestral trauma? Like, how did that actually happen when you think of the magic of that in life and how you got led there?
I just think, God, I'm so grateful that I got picked for that one. On one side of the coin, sometimes I have those frustrations, and we probably all have them in doing this work, where you just feel like, God, why did I get dealt this set of karma, points from my lineage? And usually because we were here to transform that. And for me, I finally decided when I turned 30, right after my Saturn returns, I literally had this life that I had built for myself. I felt like, the American dream. I had a few houses and I did really well and I could take vacations. And it was very, I was always very much about women, connecting with women. I worked with a group of women. We together created this women's networking group called Girl Power Hour. We had like 6,000 women that were coming to our events and connecting together.
Wow.
But it just didn't have that richness to it that this spiritual path and the depth of like the real work have. So I had this wake up call where, actually it was funny because, I went to raves. I did a lot of MDMA in like my later high school and into my 20s. And then I let the dare, scare, campaigns get me. And I was like, oh God, I could get brain damage from taking MDMA all the time. Maybe I shouldn't take it anymore. So I stopped taking it. And then in my Saturn returns, which is like 28 and a half to 30, I got a traumatic brain injury. And I was at my cousin's house and I flopped down on the couch and I didn't realize there was like something hard on the back and I hit the back of my head. And that TBI activated. It's interesting how brain inflammation can change your entire personality. And this is so fascinating when you look at it from the standpoint of how many veterans there are out there suffering from like war blast wounds that create TBI. So I got this head injury. It stimulated anxiety in me to like a very high degree. And I was always a little bit of an ADD. I was diagnosed with ADD, but like anxious person, a little bit more on that scale, but it just amplified it to another level where it was like very unbearable. And so I decided finally, I'm going to figure this out because I went to this doctor and the doctor was like, you know, you're like a breed of Chihuahua. You know how Chihuahuas are more anxious. It's just your nature. And I'm like, you mean I have to live with this for the rest of my life? And I wouldn't accept that answer. So that's when I went back to the MDMA. And in taking the MDMA, more on a recreational basis, I had this epiphany, you know, because I had a lot of epiphanies, but this one specifically that was like, you're not on the right path. This isn't your real husband. This isn't your real life. It was kind of almost like, I love the movie Kill Bill. And you know how he says, how Bill says to Black Mamba is her code name. And I think I can't remember what her real name is in the film, but he said, you know, you were never meant to be a Texas wife. And, you know, no matter how much barbecue you ate or how big your ass got, you're a killer, you know, and this is your destiny. And so that's why he kind of went after her and tried to take her out, but was unsuccessful, was, you know, kind of the whole basis. And I felt like that. I felt like I was waking up in the dream where I was like, this is really great and amazing, but this isn't who I am. And so I went to go find my authentic self. I realized that anxiety in me was actually like my soul, like, what the hell is this person driving doing? Why are they going this way when we should be going this way? And they're just like inside, like, what the hell? And so that journey awoken me into just really going deep into my trauma, discovering ayahuasca, which eventually led me to Martin Polanco at Crossroads, synchronistically, which, I mean, that's how it always is with this.
It's amazing.
And I had this experience with ibogaine in the beginning of the psycho-spiritual program, which was a new program at Crossroads at the time. I was kind of one of the first people to go through it.
It was kind of the only one in the world at the time, too, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's the only place for doing psycho-spiritual ibogaine, although there were some people, you know, obviously going to Gabon and getting initiated. And then there were a couple of retreat centers in Costa Rica doing iboga work, more psycho-spiritual, but in the Bwiti tradition. But so anyway, at this point, in the medicine, I truly saw myself for the first time. I had that visceral gnosis of experience that was that little piece that I couldn't find anywhere else, that was just like, you have an eating disorder because you think you're separate from things, and you're not. And you're part of all of this. This is all you, and there's nothing separate. And it's not like seeing things from that side of, this is more valuable than this. It's like, it's all one. And it wasn't the same kind of oneness that I experienced from 5-MeO-DMT. It was like a very much like a owning of my body in a sacred way that as I feel like the 5-MeO takes you out of your body, but I was like really like rooting into my body in this sacred way where I just had so much gratitude and I was just pouring tears. And in that, I said to the medicine, how can I serve you? I really believe that this is what everyone in humanity needs when they're ready for it, when they're ready to finally say, and I could talk for the whole podcast about all the other things that happened to me in the process. For example, my car getting repoed, like all these things that like after I decided, it wasn't just like I decided to leave my life behind and everything was amazing. No, I was like sleeping on people's couches. I used to own 4 houses and there was a time period where I didn't have a home. And so it wasn't like hunky dory and amazing. And God, I'm so grateful I had that experience so I can help others not to make some of the same mistakes that I did. So then I finally, after, 10 years of doing my own inner work, like, really deep like work. And I would say like 5 years into my ceremonial plant medicine journey, which is like, wow, these are tools for healing and sacred and are supposed to be used in a sacred container. I finally said, okay, how can I serve? And then within 2 weeks, I was asked to facilitate as one of the facilitators in the psycho-spiritual program at Crossroads.
Wow.
And I was taken aback because, first off, I'm like, who am I? On one side of the coin, like, what do I know? And then the medicine came in so strongly. And it was just like, don't get in your head about this. You said, I want to be of service. And do you want to be of service? And I was like,
right.
Yes, I do. And I said yes. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of it. And really, truly, like my whole motivation in this work has truly been, number one, to protect, the medicine, to protect iboga as a sacred initiatory rite in what's mine to do, because this is a tradition that's from Africa, belongs to Bwiti. And I'm not trying to be a representative for the tradition. I am here as a bridge to support what needs to happen and to translate what that is, because it's one of the most complex traditions and one of the most intense medicines that exists, but it's also one of the most rare. So we need people on the ground that are truly, listening to the medicine, connected to the lineage that can actually, help that be protected. And then, walking this path, I met my partner, same time as this iboga journey. Synchronistically, he, through another person, had been introduced to Martin Polanco. He was struggling for 15 years with debilitating Lyme disease. We started like dating right before my first journey. And he was in bed on disability, could barely get out of bed. He was so sick. When I first met, I was homeless at the time. As I said, he offered up his couch to me. He was not like any of the creepy guys that were like trying to get with me. He was quite the opposite. He was just like, I want to help you. I want to support you. And eventually I said to him, even though it meant losing my couch, you need to go move back in with your own parents. Like, you need to like heal and recover. Like, you shouldn't be trying to take care of me or anybody else, but you. And so in that period, I started psychedelic journeys, and I started psychedelic journeys because I wanted to keep feeding the medicine to Joseph. So I kept doing all of these retreats to keep him going. And by the time he had his 6th retreat, because with chronic conditions, by the way, keep in mind, I don't recommend people doing this over and over and over again, but for him, for how deep of a chronic Lyme disease and how much it ravaged his entire body, it actually was like medicine for him. And the one thing about iboga is it's a very yang medicine in many aspects. So if you take someone who's very sick, it can build you back up again. And that's what it did for him. Not all sicknesses are great with this medicine, because you really have to be careful depending on, what you're dealing with. And by the way, I'm not a doctor, not making any diagnoses. But in this situation with him, it really was helping to fortify him, to really give him his strength back. And that's when
Mm-hmm.
he started working for MAPS and became a therapist
Wow.
for the phase 2 and phase 3 trials. We started doing our retreats together. And I'll stop there. But,
Oh my
that's
gosh.
kind of the whole, how did I get started
Get
on this? It was
here.
really healing and,
Healing.
being of service.
Being of service, the medicine found you, and then all the synchronicities after you said yes, from
Mm-hmm.
losing everything and gaining everything, including Joseph. And what would you want people to know about this medicine, iboga? Because I know that this is really part of your life's work.
Probably that it's not about knowing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you look at the tradition of Witi and iboga, most of the Nima, which are the masters that perform the initiatory rites that spend, 10 to 15 years in training and receive this blessing or handed this altar, the power of the altar of the Witi, they train to tell everyone to be completely open in all ways, because the more open you are, the more you can receive. And I will tell you this too, from my experience working with iboga over many years with myself as well as with others. The minute the mind starts to get in the way of the journey, the minute the mind starts to pick pieces apart and say, oh, this means this or this means that, then the medicine stops working with you. And so you're going to get the most out of the experience if you just completely surrender and let go. So the more that you read so many books and do all of these things, the more it's actually potentially going to, kind of condition your intellectual mind and potentially get in the way of the journey itself. Now, on the other side of the coin, our culture in this culture, in Western culture, is so traumatized, and we feel so unsafe. Everything that we're doing, all the addiction, all of the war, everything is really around like core safety and like in the essence of it all. It's around safety and power and, all these dynamics. And I think there's a certain amount of information that is super helpful to go in, because it's truly a terrifying experience. And to have some of that information too, in the midst of that experience where you're like, okay, I'm not losing my mind. I'm not going crazy. I'm just having the hard drive defragged. Then it can be really helpful. But I also want to be really, really careful. Like when someone engages with me and they want to know about what, the journey is going to be like and what questions, like really how I can respond in a way that it's not going to condition that experience. And even just giving those caveats, saying, hey, or disclaimer, I should say, disclaimer, everything I say you can throw out the window, but it's just there for you to know that your hard drive is getting defragged or whatever it is, So yeah, that's kind of my answer.
Yeah. I remember that experience actually, and not knowing what it was. That was interesting experience, feeling like iboga was going into these files and everything was going so fast. I couldn't even capture what was there. It was almost as if I was watching a TV of someone else's house going by really, really fast. But it works in such mysterious, beautiful ways. What would you say is at the core of what iboga has taught you in your life?
I mean, there's so many things that iboga has taught me, that to single it out to one thing, because it's really about how to live life. And really the core of Bwiti is about truth. So the most important thing that I've learned from Bwiti that I think really carries across the whole lineage is about connecting to your truth. And everyone's truth is different. And I think what's really important about truth, in the Bwiti perspective, the word that's used for truth is base. And basse actually means truth, but it's the most frequently used word because it's the thing that we need to remember the most. And the truth is understanding and asking, because when we are born and when we grow up with our parents and when we're introduced into society, we are conditioned in many different ways. And someone says, oh, the sky is blue, and it's blue because of XYZ, because it's the reflection of the ocean or whatever it is. And we just trust that that's the truth. But is that really the truth? And when we look at ourselves and when we look at all the assumptions we've made about ourselves and all the things that are running in the back of our unconscious mind, these are all things that we need to question. And the gift of Bwiti is it's almost like this Marco Polo. There's times in the journey where it's like a call and response, where you ask a question and the medicine responds to you. And even in the way that you have emotions and even in the way that you think in the journey, it's the same thing, this call and response where it's reflecting back to you. So when you really think about this idea of truth, it's about really examining every part of your life and really being like, is that truth? Is this truth? And what's interesting is the deeper you go down there, you find the real truth. And you also find all the things that were the lies that you told yourself, the lies that your family told you, the lies that society has told you. And then also I want to say on the other side of the coin, our truth is for us. It's not for anybody else. It's our compass for how we move. And what we have to be really careful is in any plant medicine journey is how we take what we learn and apply it towards others or apply it towards things that we put out into the world. So we have to really understand that we're all the same facets, like the idea of Indra's nets. We're all jewels within this beautiful web of life, this interconnected, beautiful web of life. And each one of us is exactly the same thing, but just this different archetypal expression of it. And so the beauty of the medicine is that you go in, and in many of these initiations, you're shown your archetypes of who you are. And in asking, like, even just the question, who am I? You learn so much about these expressions of who you are that allow you to align so deeply with them so that you are who you are and you're able to walk in the path of who you are.
So beautiful and so powerful. I mean, just even thinking of what your body feels like. I know before you did ibogaine and was initiated into Bwiti, when you were saying you were married, but there was something inside your body feeling like my life looks so good, but there's this friction within. And the difference between being in alignment to what is true for your soul is such a different feeling within the body. I know that this medicine is becoming more popular in the West due to the need for ibogaine and the Western kind of our addiction and healing addiction. And it's a profound medicine to help, as you mentioned, veterans and people with addiction. What can you tell us about the way you think that the Western culture could go about this in a way that would be in respect and alignment to truth and the Bwiti people?
I think the core thing that I'm seeing in the whole psychedelic movement is this need to move forward fast. And it's way too fast. The people that are now stepping forward as leaders in the space have barely any experience. And a lot of the great elders are dying off. And so we're essentially this kind of orphaned movement. And, we've still got a few elders left, but not a lot in like what we really need to do. And I think in those kind of circumstances, you really have to slow down and make a good plan. make a really good framework of like, what does stewardship look like in the greater perspective? What are the side effects of this movement, positive and negative, that are going to impact children, families? We have to protect all people in moving forward. So I say the same is true for iboga, but I think it's important for the entire movement. The first thing I would say is, who are the greatest elders of ibogaine? If you look at the history of ibogaine, and you look at, how it was brought here was a gift from Gabon. And when you look at that, the way Bwiti believe relationship happens is in community. So if you go to Gabon and you get initiated, you're part of a family. And that means you have responsibilities. Number one, obviously, to be a protector of Bwiti, of the traditional knowledge of the plant of Gabon as the place that, has the sacred lands of this medicine. In Bwiti, when you get initiated, your first responsibility is to protect Bwiti. And, I don't think that everyone should get initiated. I don't think there's enough iboga and there's enough bandwidth. And I know how it impacts the culture having Westerners come. And so I think there might be like a middle road. Maybe it's like having, places in the US where elders come and do training. But ultimately, the way that it has to be led is by bringing in Bwiti elders along with experts in the space and co-creating a stewardship strategy together. Something that's very focused on reciprocity, something that's very focused on the way of Bwiti. The way of Bwiti is, you exchange in Bwiti because everything in nature exchanges. Everything is the in and the out breath. So for instance, if you're someone who has a lot of resources and you come to Gabon and you say, I would like to be initiated, many times, and this isn't always the case, it depends on the tradition, you will be given a divination. And let's say that you are a billionaire. They might say, you need to pay us $1 million for this initiation. And that is based on, the fact that when you make an offering, it has to be something that hurts a little bit, that you can feel it. And so if you think about like ibogaine in the West, it costs money. Typically the detoxes are around $15,000 plus or minus. And that's a big offering that you make, but you get something big in exchange. You get many times your life back. If you've heard the many testimonials of veterans and people who have had opiate use disorder, how this medicine gives your life back. And the offering and what you get is also in relation to that. So we really have to think about, how is that strategy done? And in the Bwiti tradition, it's not this like cookie cutter, like, oh, if it's this, it's this. It's more done through the acts of divination. So I think it's got to be a blended model that has both the intuitive aspect to it, that has the aspect of access for certain people in certain situations. But at the same time, I don't necessarily believe that this level of work should be given away for free, because it's not just about that. It's also that if you haven't put enough skin in the game, then you aren't going to really appreciate the gift that you've received. And that's not always the case. There are still people that receive the gift that are very grateful. But I would say that it's a hard journey. It's a long journey. And the amount of work that you're going to have to do following the journey is enormous. You're going to spend the next year integrating. And if you hadn't been through that experience, what will give you the motivation to continue to do that work if you haven't made some kind of offering?
I think that's a really good point too. The integration can take a year, even longer. I think
Mm-hmm.
I always say, my gosh, I think I'll be integrating iboga for my life.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found for me, just in this past almost 9 years that I still get deep. Like it's almost like a moment of integration where this locking in of understanding that kind of
Mhm.
essentially anchors a part of myself in where it's just so powerful. And
Mhm.
I still have it happening where like I go back and I see this part of the journey where I was like really struggling and I'm like, see this reflection of this piece of myself that I wouldn't have been able to see before because I was just so um, unaware of that pattern within myself. And it took so much time of stepping away and
Mhm.
it's kind of like the frog in the pot of boiling water where all of a sudden you're just like, okay.
And it does take some time. You don't see it instantly, or maybe you see a little sliver of it. And then as you're going on in your life, as you said, something will arise. And then you're just like, oh, that's the thing. That ties more deeply into my truth. Or you can feel the energetics, as you were speaking of like one of your initial wounds, whether it's unworthiness, safety,
Yeah.
whatever it is, you can feel where that lives in the body.
Mhm.
And then suddenly it's almost like this expanding out to allow that space to be seen and known and to integrate back into wholeness into oneself. Yeah, iboga seems to keep kind of working and with us at all times. So, this retreat that you're building, how is that emerging and when will that be ready? And what is your plan for this beautiful retreat?
I'm so excited to talk about it because I mean, obviously, everyone's like, I can't wait to do psychedelics in the Azores. But I have some news. There will be no psychedelics at this retreat center, at least when we
Uh-huh.
open.
Uh-huh.
We are opening in roughly 2026. We'll be open. Our psychedelic is called thermal hot springs, which are very, very psychedelic. And the focus really on this retreat, someday if the legal jurisdictions change in Portugal and allow for psychedelic work, we'll be very grateful. But we really wanted the emphasis to be a place that you can go and truly integrate, that has the best food for your body, to cleanse your body, to purify, the best nature. And I would say like the most jaw-dropping, beautiful nature is in the Azores, and especially in the region where we're building our retreat. Vernis is this lush, tropical garden that is just like
Oh my
heaven. I
gosh.
was just watching this video yesterday, and I'm like, why can't it be open already? Because I just want to be there right now. I mean, it's just like heaven on earth. And yeah, I'm super grateful to the medicine because it basically told me
Mhm.
during right before COVID that I was to build a retreat center in the Azores, which I'd never heard of before, and somehow managed to get there in the middle of the pandemic, got a government letter to be able to travel, flew on a plane that was pretty much almost empty, went and saw the land, was able to, get started on the development and do all the development work during lockdown. And yeah, and just we found the most incredible architect. I had worked very closely with the Kogi, and I was part of this council called Holistic Visions, and we met
Mhm.
in 2018 in Barcelona, and we had different elders come into our councils. I was on the New Energy
Mhm.
Council, and they would essentially, chime in on what they felt their ideas of how it would add to whatever strategy we had to address specific
Mhm.
issues that were of global interest. For example,
Mhm.
energy, family systems, economy, all of these things. And so
Mhm.
essentially it was a way of spiritualizing and ancestralizing policy in a group collective creative process, which was profound. And the two Kogi elders came in, Mama Luis and Mama Evangeliste. And what was so profound was that they had a translator, but they weren't talking. So literally they were psychically transmitting the information to the translator. And what he said was, humans live in boxes. We're buried in boxes. We stare at boxes. And the universe thinks in spirals. And we have to start thinking in alignment with nature. And he talked about the Kogi had these incredible original houses of thought. And there are these huts that are very simple. And you hang a hammock inside a cross, and you have a fire, and you go into dream and talk to the ancestors, and you receive information. And immediately I received this transmission of these like kind of dome-shaped, feminine-shaped architecture. It was essentially like a modern translation of a place where people can essentially utilize it instead of, like I had many, like 3 houses in my history of my, recent years of having mold. And it was there to teach me, and it was there to teach me that modern architecture is not healthy at all. And it, like the canned recess lights are horrible for the, like, I don't want to get too out there, but it blocks the crown chakra. So it actually, if you're meditating and you have your lights on, it affects like your ability to receive messages. And I noticed, especially in Spain, because, the EU electricity is a higher
voltage.
And what I would notice is that I could hear the sound of the electricity, and it would keep me up at night. And I was like, no, this needs to be wired in a way that it's not interrupting the processes. And then, the way that we design the lighting, it's designed so that it's a lot of like kind of more peripheral lighting instead of down lighting. So that, and we use light tubes, which use natural light coming in. And so that at nighttime, when the sun goes down, you start producing your own natural melatonin. Your body goes through its own cycle, and you're able to actually recharge your body. And really essentially what it is it's a building structure that acts as a human battery. It actually feeds you, protects you, and helps you to regenerate your field versus modern architecture, which essentially takes away from that. And that's why you feel so much better outside than you do inside.
Well, it's so amazing. I just in the years that I've known you, I don't know if you have a photographic memory. I'm not really sure. But you have so much knowledge about so many things, in particular, beyond nature, the human body.
So the way that we did it, we worked with Freddie Silva, who is an expert in ancient temple design. And we actually gridded the property so that on one side of the property, it's about being in community and being with others. And then the other side of the property is about initiation and going inward. So it has the energies to support and encourage that. And then the entire property is gridded for creativity.
Okay, now I want it to be open.
I'm excited.
So, how many of the houses will you have?
So, right now we have. There was a lot that we had to deal with, and I think a lot of it is an expression of what we're dealing with in the world, which is, we live in a capitalistic society that's not looking at things in the context of how do we awaken our highest potential, but instead, how do we maximize profits or, many different things. And so what I found was working with banks, working with institutions, working with architects, that were unfamiliar with the way that Joseph and I think about these things. There's a big learning curve, and the whole process for me has been really, I think, one of it is helping others to understand, but also coming up against a lot of forces that are like, very against change and want the old way because it's easier for them. If they see something that's outside of the box, what do I do with that? How do I pencil that into what law code?
Right.
What infraction do I give this person? And so when we designed it, we have 14 rooms, and I wanted them to be individual private bungalows, but based on the fact that it's a UNESCO protected sanctuary, it's got a gorgeous river going through it. There's thermal hot springs coming out of the river. And so, we had to kind of make a lot of adjustments to what our dream would be to fit that. But I will say, when we build our next center, it will be exactly, because we've been through this exercise. It will be like the 2.0 of what we do in the Azores, or maybe at some point we'll be able to upgrade some of the things that were a struggle to get around. But it's 7 of these, I don't want to call them houses of thought because they're not, because that's something that belongs to the Kogi, but these inspired by, this and they're caves, essentially. They're designed in this idea of, a lot of these great initiations and practices used to happen in caves, and, monks would meditate in caves. And so it's got this kind of like cave-like structure, and it's essentially a womb that you go back into to be reborn, essentially. And so it's your place, because the work isn't just like you think, oh, it's the room where you're sleeping. But no, the work is happening. The big work is happening while you're sleeping.
Oh my gosh, how beautiful.
So
amazing.
Yeah.
And so this amazing book, Seeding Consciousness, I'm dying to read it. And I'm curious, is this kind of your life's work of what you have learned about consciousness and medicine and becoming whole? What is this book that you're about to gift to the world?
Well, in 2018, I was in an initiation in my Bhuti father, who passed this last year, at Tumarbenga's village. And I got a very clear message that I had to write this book. And was given, this is what you're going to write about. These are the chapters. It was very clear. And interestingly, it's in essence a mystery school, but it's translated in a way that it really can apply across the sphere of the psychedelic space. We are missing these modern initiatory rites. We are missing these kind of sequencings, and there is a really important why behind all of it. And it's also a way of moving in the world. And so essentially this is kind of in essence bridging together alchemy and hermetic principles and Bhuti and the deep journey work, which I know you know about, which is when we go into the psyche and we engage with with our unconscious, and how we engage with that unconscious and what's happening in there and what happens afterwards. And this is from my experience of working with over 2,000 people over, nearly a decade of like getting in there and seeing what's happening. So I share, with permission, with people that have given me permission, I share a few stories about those experiences as they apply within, the sequence of the work. But really, honestly, it's probably like when I first wrote it, I realized it's more than one book. And so I had to really compact it down. And again, working in, the modern world,
Right.
working with major publishers. And I asked, I did divinations, and I said, can I just self-publish this book? This is such a lot of work to have to try to fit into the box of every publisher has a formula.
Right.
And so
Certain
they go
number
through
of pages and
they go
all
through
of
and
it.
they just tear it apart, and you're like, no, you can't cut the notes, not that. They're like, why? That doesn't seem that. And you're like, this is why, because you have to go bump, 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 bump. And, it's like a whole thing. So,
even understanding that there's like transmission in the words, there's transmission in the teachings.
And
Yeah.
So, and then also coming from the space of being born in a Mercury retrograde and feeling like sometimes I'm not the best communicator. Like my husband has that gift. But I feel like I have a different way of communicating, and it's a little bit more all over the place. And he's really good at that. And so it really helped me to train. So I know it was like an initiation for myself. And I would say just like anyone who is writing a book can attest that writing is probably more difficult than psychedelics because all of your inner critic, flashes come through, and it's just like, is anyone gonna like this? Is this crap? And I highly recommend, by the way, if anyone out there is wanting to really step into your creative power, and I wish I had read this. I wish this book had even been published before I wrote my book, but Rick Rubin has a book called The Creative Act. And it really talks about this kind of liminal space that you're in the creative process and how to really be with that. And I would say, take that and then put the word psychedelic instead of creative, and you could actually use it for the whole psychedelic process too. It actually goes both ways. So, yeah, I feel like writing a book is a deep facing of oneself. And, many times I was just like, oh, I don't want to finish this book. And do I really need to? Maybe it was just for me. I don't have to do it. And then it was like, no, you got to finish this book. So I did it.
Amazing. Congratulations. What would you say
Thanks.
that initiation taught you?
I think a lot about discipline. And I think that anyone who carries the father wounding, I feel like all my hard stuff that I always dealt with was coming from the masculine side of not having like a really loving, present father. And, part of what you receive from that is the discipline piece, which is learning how to really, have structure in your life. And as you can see, I'm a lot more feminine than I am masculine. So, I think it really just forced me to be disciplined. It forced me to kind of cope with a lot of what I felt during my years growing up being neurodivergent, because, when you see other people doing things and you're like, wow, it's so much easier for them. And, I have this productivity guilting activity that I do to myself, which is have the ADD, get distracted by something, and then guilt myself because I wasn't being focused and I wasted all that time. And so I punish myself for it, essentially. And so I feel like it really helped me to just like come into acceptance and just to love that part of myself that's the wanderer, and that's actually part of the creative process sometimes, that, those little breaks. It's like, you don't have to just like what is creativity? Is it this like going into this cave and just like going? No, there's so much of this, like
wander is so important.
Everything.
There's this book, it's like a children's book, and I bought it because I have a couple neurodivergence in my family, including myself and my daughter and my son. And it's called Give a Pig a Pancake. And it was like, the pig wants the pancake, but then when it sees the syrup, it thinks of like painting. And then it heads to go paint, but on the way to go paint, it smelled something. And I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly it. It's like this little pig that goes on this journey. And in the end, it ends up right where it wants to be. But it was quite wandering, that's what it was. It gets sticky from the syrup, which made it think of wallpaper and wallpapering something. I'm like, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So just speaking of this, wound, and you've held thousands of people in medicine space. What is it like for you? Has there been a shift in how you work with not only your own wounds, but holding other people's wounds? How do you work with that?
I mean, I think the reality is just everything is about compassion. It's really about, letting go of any preconceived notion and, just being there for the person, being present, listening, asking questions, seeing when, I see this in some people with their own wounding where they want to take the focus off of themselves because obviously they're going into something painful. And then it's being able to be aware of that where they're like, well, what about you? Or what do you think? And then it's like bringing it back and being like, in a loving way, like, this is about you. And I really, want to support you in learning as much as you can about yourself. And, how can I support that? And so I would say, there's no perfect recipe to supporting others. The thing that I've learned the most is through experience and lots of experience over time. And I would say peer review because, my husband being a psychologist, he's always giving me feedback on ways I can improve. And it's really helped me. Also working at the clinic, I was working with doctors. So we would always kind of go over things together and integrate and continue to grow. Whether it was with my husband or like even, with my team when we were, doing a lot more retreats. Right now, I'm more focused on building a retreat center. So I haven't been doing retreats recently. But I just really think that the holding space, it's just like a deep, deep, deep level of listening that becomes a meditation that the more that you allow yourself to do, the more you'll just keep learning and growing. And if you, stop or limit yourself in any way, that's when the work no longer is interesting, and I really feel that, the path is about whether you're receiving or giving. It's always a reflection. There's always a healing relationship. It's not just one person receiving the healing. And so as the one essentially holding the space, you're not holding anything. You're allowing the highest expression to come through. And so I think that's really the most important thing is being able to listen in that way, to be able to move, in that ocean, in that current of that energy, which is a real feel that you feel in the medicine and is beautiful.
And then also, one of the things I always see with you and Joseph is whatever's coming up in life, you continue to go into it like an initiation with full acceptance, knowing that everything that's before you is for your greater good and the greater good of others. Just even your back issue this year and some of Joseph's stuff. And you greet everything with such a deep reverence.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, there were times during, when I was laying on the couch and was in level 10 pain and, just in the depths of that, that were really, really difficult. And I'm grateful that I can shine on the other side. And I would say like even in the journey, like just because of going through initiations, I just like the ones that have a defined beginning and end. Like when you go to Gabon and you show up, your flight leaves at X time. And so, there's like, not really like that it's end, but there's like some release of energy there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I remember at a retreat with you with iboga, and iboga stayed in me a long time. And I remember calling you and Joseph up saying, the medicine needs to leave now. It just needs to go. And you said, I think iboga wants more time with you. And I was like on a timeline. I was on a timeline for this work. And it was interesting. That night, iboga gave me one of the greatest gifts I had in medicine, which was, I had said this prayer that night in my little teepee. And just that I really needed to kind of be done with this journey. And I remember something came and it was like, if you need me to really look at this and really accept this and go into this, I will. And in that second, it all left my body. Like all the sensations that
Wow.
were there. And it like literally in that second, I was like, okay, here's my work. Here it is.
Wow.
That was, yeah.
I mean, doesn't always happen that way, but you were given
No.
a blessing, which
Yeah.
in Bwiti we call that mabondo, which is grace, where it said, okay, sure, we can play along with that. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
usually it's the opposite that I've found. It's what a gift and what a blessing. And I remember you sharing that. But just for those listening, I'll say as a side note, usually when you're thinking it has to end, it's the minute that you let go of it needing to end. I don't think you were in a
No,
state where
that's
you felt like
true.
it needed to end.
No,
But when
no.
people are in that state where they're like, I need this to end, it's like not letting go until you've really learned that you have to let go. And
Yes.
like the medicine's done with you when it's done with you.
Yeah, really true. So we're in such interesting times right now, not only in the psychedelic space, but globally. And some of these things are kind of, matching each other. And you were talking about some of the systems you were running into just even doing your project. What are your feelings about where we are in the psychedelic space and what's going on in the world?
In the psychedelic space, what I'm seeing is really an amplification of the shadow on all levels. And I'm also seeing a lot of spiritual bypass in the whole entire movement, which is that, you can't have a movement unless you do the work. Like you can't go to the government and say, hey, Gavin Newsom, we want you to legalize psilocybin without having a really good plan in place. And it worked for Colorado where they said, yeah, we'll set up a board and we'll develop it after we approve it. But really, you don't want to put the cart before the horse because these are children. These are, veterans, people that are disabled, all the people that actually represent the entire landscape of all people that will be touched by psychedelics. We have to think of all of them. And we may be the outliers. We may be the leaders of a movement in the sense in relation to the rest of the world,
Right.
because it's illegal. You're taking a risk, and the other big piece is we don't really know where things are going to land. We don't know if the US I think it's pretty public now. I don't think it's top secret. So I think I can say on here that cannabis is going to get rescheduled. Were you aware of that? Yeah. So we do know there is some shifts, there is some change happening, but how many years of cannabis dispensaries and, use in statewide, it's over a decade, isn't it? If I'm not mistaken. More, I'd have to look it up, but it took that long and we haven't even got there yet to reschedule cannabis. Now, thank you.
Now, for people that don't know why cannabis is going to be rescheduled, could you explain that a little bit?
So essentially, cannabis is on Schedule 1. We don't know what it will mean in its rescheduling because it obviously is not public knowledge yet. But what it will do is on the federal level, if you take cannabis and you take it off the schedule, it changes the way that cannabis business is done because currently cannabis business owners of dispensaries, people that grow cannabis, those that make cannabis products, cannot use the banking system. And because it's federally illegal, you cannot take any tax write-offs as a business. And I don't know if some people may not know this, but what that means is if you are $1 million company and let's say you sell $1 million worth of cannabis, usually the way it works is you have employees and you have your cost of goods and all of these things, rent, all of these things, and you get to write them off against your income. And what you have is a profit. And then that's what you pay tax on. In the cannabis industry, you pay tax on the $1 million. So what that means is the cost of doing business is so high. That's why cannabis has to be expensive. That's why so it changes the access, number one. Number two, it's also that it can't cross state lines because of the federal, it's based on local state legislation. So if you have a business that is working with cannabis in let's say Oregon, you can't use your products in another state. You would have to go to that state. You'd have to open up a completely new operation in that state. So it's going to change the dynamic of the industry, but for people and what that's going to look like, I think from like the optics of it and psychedelics, is I think it's going to open up a lot more organizations because they can't use the federal illegal card anymore. So it could open up church use. It could, even though there is already structures to be able to use medicines in a church, in a church way, for religious use, I'll say. And then it's going to change the, kind of just the way it's viewed in society and how it's used in society. And I still think that there are people that still carry the trauma, like an older generation, I think more than the younger generation. If you were to survey everyone that, still feels because of that federal legislation, oh, I can't use that. So I think it's going to open that up, which I think is essentially like, we say cannabis is the gateway drug, going to open up the space in many of the other corners of the psychedelic space. So in terms of what's happening also in the psychedelic space, I think the biggest thing, and, I'm really grateful that Dr. Martin Polanco from Mission Within, he started Crossroads and then he broke off and created a company called Mission Within, which is specifically offering treatments under scholarship for veterans with PTSD and other trauma. And he started the work working with Navy SEAL veterans who had severe trauma. And I was fortunate enough to get to work with a lot of these veterans and be involved in a lot of projects around advocacy work for veterans through Mission Within and also with my husband. So essentially what that has done, 500 of those veterans several years ago went and marched. More and more vets organizations have started, like Vet started, I think a couple years ago. There's a whole slew of other organizations that I could name, at least a dozen, that are all kind of doing some similar kind of advocacy work for veterans. Now there's been thousands of veterans and they've really stood up and they've really kind of pushed the system. They're like, we serve the country and we're messed up now and we need healing and we want psychedelics for our healing. And so it's really caused a lot of shifts and change in the space. One of the things that, it's done is it's really created a change of tide in a lot more of the conservative states. So the more Republican states, because, psychedelics have tended to be a little bit of a partisan issue, meaning that more Democratic places, states tend to be more open to psychedelics, decrim, and cannabis, legalizing cannabis. I would say New York has been the slowest of all of them, just legalizing it recently. And so these veterans have really rallied for all of these states. We've got Ohio, we've got Kentucky, we've got North Carolina, I mean, all these different states, Arizona, that are putting money towards psychedelic research, but primarily because the stigma is changing, because it's coming from a different voice, from a voice that, is relatable in a language that really is addressing the core pain that is in a lot of these particular regions. And I think that this is really exciting because it's like there's one thing in all the separation and all the division of COVID where there's a unifying cause, where they're coming together and we're like, we want them. But then the difference is like how we language that. And, it's very interesting being on the backside of, working with different politics and different governments, and being behind the scenes in the meetings and how things need to be worded to be appeasing to the Republican vote versus how they need to be worded to be appeasing to the Democratic vote. And right now, one of the biggest, most incredible things is that in the midst of the most horrific opiate crisis, primarily due to opioids, that, there was the federal lawsuit around, and the states of Kentucky were targeted by drug companies for marketing and essentially targeting. They found that the most disadvantaged communities were the ones most likely to, make the most revenue for the drug companies. So they targeted them and they were able to win these like multi-million-dollar lawsuits. And the state of Kentucky became aware of ibogaine. And because of just knowing that a lot of these treatments for opioid use disorder have a very low success rate, they brought it to the table in their opiate abatement committee and have been doing a series of hearings over the last couple months where they've brought in experts all over the world on ibogaine and addiction treatment. Could happen, couldn't happen. There's been a really big smear campaign from the opposing political sides that has been trying to, kind of essentially discredit ibogaine and the motivations behind the idea of exploring it. But I can tell you just from sitting in so many of these meetings, it comes from the most genuine, openness and humility to explore what's best for the people of Kentucky and in an integrative way. So I pray that if it's the highest and best for ibogaine to come into the U.S. in that way, that gets approved.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that side of things there on what's going on in Kentucky and with the cannabis. It is huge shifts. And I know one of the things that is always important to you is to be in right relationship with the medicine and the traditions that they come from and the land. And I'm curious how things in the United States stand in relationship to that at this point within the psychedelic movement.
It's very interesting. And I'm going to say something that might, I don't want to say I'll regret saying it, but I want to be brutally honest. We have to stop intertwining any kind of political narratives into the psychedelic movement. We can have advocacy, we can have all of these things, but we have to be careful that the things that we're putting out there aren't creating further separation and division. And with that being said, I would say that there are many great organizations out there that are doing incredible work, that are giving money back to these indigenous stewards of these traditions. And, whether that's in the Amazon or in Gabon or in Mexico or, wherever it is, they are, doing this. But what I'm finding from the fundraising perspective is that the general amount of money is coming from very large foundations, which means it's people that have a lot of resource and, they're supporting in that way. So yes, these things are moving forward, but are the general population of people that are taking psychedelics and the ones that are getting such incredible benefits that, are just overflowing with gratitude for it, are they actually giving back in reciprocity? That piece is being missed on a very big level. And, I think part of it too is that there's a lot of Western facilitators that aren't really telling the story behind the work and really the understanding underneath where all of this comes from. And it's sad because when we think of the idea of plants, if we look at our consumption rate of how quickly we are consuming the global supply of indigenous psychoactive plant medicines and how much is being planted and how much is being cultivated for the future, our future generations may not have things like Bufo alvarius or iboga or peyote or even San Pedro or even ayahuasca. And, really, I see each and every one of us and every future person as my future self. Wouldn't I want this there for my future self to have? I
Definitely.
have said this before.
Yes.
Yes. I've said this before that I believe that, the psychedelics aren't here for us. They're here. They tend to be more prevalent, I feel, when we're in these cosmic times of great change because they assist us in that process. But if we're already in the process of our own healing, we don't really need them. If we're doing the practices we're supposed to do to maintain our vitality, if we're in a system where we're educated on how to stay connected to our true self, if we're eating healthy organic food so we're not dirtying up our channels in our body and we feel connected to the entire universe through our body, then we don't need to be taking psychedelics like we are right now. But in this time of emergency, these things are here for us to help us and assist us. And on one side of the coin, if we don't have them, if we're not gobbling them up, so to say, there may not be an entire planet at all. The toad told me that one time. I said, "What do you think? Is it okay to be consuming your venom for sacramental purposes? If it's doing so much harm?" And the toad's like, "I'm not exactly thrilled about it, but hey, if I don't offer that up, I might not be around either."
Yes.
Everyone's making sacrifices,
right,
for this big shift.
So let's end with the big shift. What are you feeling is approaching humanity?
It's very interesting because if I was to look at it like, when you take a short-acting psychoactive medicine, there's like this moment you cross through and you're on the other side, and the other side is the other side. And it's different. And you're on the other side. And it's just like when you die, you leave your body and you cross through, you're on the other side. Many times you're just greeted with so much love and all the ancestors, and it's a beautiful thing. And I've seen several timelines. One timeline is that we cross through the bardo of this rebirth, and we're here on this perfect planet that we steward and we take care of. And not everyone is there. Some souls, it's a very hard journey. It's interesting because when you look at the astrology for 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, it's a gnarly ride. And I truly do believe that this is kind of like COVID was the fire drill. This is going to be some crazy times. And My prayer is that every single person that is having a hard time in these times will remember the work that they've done, if they've done, this kind of work or other spiritual work, and can really gain strength from that, because it's going to be a very difficult time. And on the other side of the coin, it's only as difficult as far as you've made it in your own inner work. If you have that feeling of peace, you can be the lotus in the muddy waters. But now your spiritual work counts for double time, because you're going to actually have to use it. You're going to have to use the fruit from it. And I really experienced this in my time when I was injured, when I was in like level 10 pain, this last year, where I was like, okay, now I'm really testing how valuable my spiritual practice is. Is my spiritual practice actually leading to something that I can lean on and can provide me the resilience in difficult times? So in this process, we, at least from what I've seen, but it could be wrong, go through this process and then come out the other side of it. And there's an opportunity to start over, to create a new earth. And I hate that term because it's so frequently used in like new age jargon,
Right.
but
Right.
it's essentially just like a psychedelic reset, where we get to now say, okay, we're going to live in harmony with nature, live in harmony with the elements, and do things in the way of reciprocity with everything, with all life, and with full connection to ourselves and to the divine, to the great love of life. So I really feel like that's a timeline that can play out. And then I saw another timeline, and it was like, essentially everything is gone and it's over. And I don't know if it's like a meteor or what, but it's just like the lights are out. It's done. And I remember thinking, I asked right when that happened, I was like, well, did I accomplish my mission? Did we do what we were supposed to do? Like collectively, everyone that was hearing the call. And it was like, yep, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. And this is this was the end of everything. And so it was and then it was like, nothing ever dies.
No.
Everything, all energy is reborn. So then in that, what is that next energy? All I can say is this. In the ancient practices of meditation, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, the idea of maintaining consciousness in death is the most important thing. And really, the psychedelics are these mini deaths that allow us to practice dying, so that when we actually die, we have consciousness of where we go. So, for instance, in this time, let's say that there is this transition where we go into a different bardo that's not this physical earth realm, then, there's a little bit different of a choice for you in surrendering to that and what happens next.
Basse.
Thank you.
Maybe we can end with a prayer then.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to say that thank you. Thank you for all these beautiful medicines. Thank you for all of us that are here incarnated on this planet right now at this time. Powerful, strong beings that have so much potential. I pray each and every one of you to receive exactly what you need at this time based on your choice of how you want to show up in whatever is yours to do. And I pray that you receive exactly what you need to receive and all the support to really understand what that is and how to do it with love, grace, and just to feel so supported completely and safe in that way. And I pray for all the wildlife, for all the nature, for the beauty of this planet to continue to flourish. I pray that the message comes through clearly through the medicine, that people can understand that true wealth is nature, clean air, water, beautiful, happy, vibrant wildlife thriving. And I just pray that we can all be open to receive, whether it's through the transmission of elders, plants, whatever it is, to find the solutions, to come back into harmony with nature, and to also come back into harmony within ourselves, to no longer fight within ourselves, to end the war inside, and to resolve the trauma that has resulted in the external wars that are happening on this planet today. Blessed be, so it is.
So it is.
Passe.
Thank you so passe. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Trish. I pray that prayer for you and all the lessons that you have taught me, that they spread out and multiply, and all the lives that you and Joseph have touched, that that just magnifies in the world, and many blessings for you and Joseph on this path. Yeah.
Thank you. And I reflect it back to you. I just, want you to be fully blessed and elevated in all your work, and to receive all of the gifts that you've given others through how you've touched everyone. And just to see you as a testament to the work just makes me so delighted in my heart to see someone who is walking the way and really, aware of how they are walking. Thank you.